We're back on the Thicc podcast, and the NFL draft is right around the corner. Last week, we talked about each team in the NFC's biggest draft need. Go check out that video if you haven't already. Today, we're going to be talking about each team in the AFC's biggest draft need. Going division by division, starting things off in the AFC East, the land dominated by the Buffalo Bills. And with the New England Patriots, there's two directions I could go with this. I really think their defense is rock solid. Could they get better? Yes, but that is not an area of weakness. The reason they were bad in 2024 is because they got devastated by injuries. This team clearly needs offensive line help, or they need a number one receiver. And I'll be honest, I don't think Travis Hunter is going to be on the board, and I don't really care. The offensive line is infinitely more important than wide receiver. Drake May cannot complete passes, cannot find his guys in coverage if he's on the bench because he got hurt because someone blew up his blind side. So offensive tackle is where I'm going to say is the biggest need. I think Will Campbell is the guy. I held very little weight in the arm length stuff. I think he is great at closing space if someone does create separation with a length advantage. I don't see why that would change in the NFL. He's been going up against NFL players the past 3 years in the SEC. Phenomenal talent. All the stuff about Mimbu is over-exaggeration. Campbell is the guy. That's their biggest need, and that's who I think they should go for. Trading down would be a mistake unless they can get Campbell at like 7 or 8.
I don't think you can be mad at them if they go wide receiver because they have 3 or 4 wide receiver threes, and then Stephon Diggs coming off that ACL injury as their number one receiver, who also happens to be a little temperamental. But much like you, I do agree, offensive line is their biggest need because if you want your young quarterback to succeed, he needs to have a little bit of time to get the ball off, a little bit of time to process the defense and make a throw down the field. So I think when you look at their offensive line, you look at how often Drake May was pressured last year, he needs time to at least get the ball out to whoever is catching passes for him. So I don't think you can be mad at them if they decide to go down the receiver route and go Tetero McMillan or trade down and maybe get a different wide receiver, but I would advocate more for them drafting a Will Campbell or Membu there at 4.
I'll speak in the Patriots' favor here on a few reasons. One, I think Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas are not wide receiver threes. I think Douglas is a pretty good slot guy, and Boutte got better as last season went on. They've addressed some of the offensive line issues, I think very lowly of Garrett Bradbury, but he is an upgrade over what they had at center, and Morgan Moses is a pretty good right tackle, but right now I think it's Vidarian Lowe is their left tackle. That's not sustainable. You just can't have that. You are going to get May murdered if you roll into week 1 with that guy protecting him from those defensive ends in the AFC. But we're in agreement here.
You can't really get worse unless they just completely miss like they did in the second round last year by drafting Jalen Polk.
Give Polk some more time. I'm not a year 1 bust guy unless they've got real character concerns. Anyway, moving on up to the New York Jets, I think they also go tackler. I think they get the bookend pair set. They got Olu. They can go right tackler. They lost Moses. They can just kind of solidify that offensive line. That's a big need for them. Wide receiver 2 is a little bit interesting. It's kind of just Garrett Wilson, the island of misfit toys, thanks to the Rodgers rejects bouncing out of town or just not being relevant. Defense could always get better on that side of the ball. Having Mason Graham to pair with Quinn Williams would be nice on that D-line, but you just can't keep investing early resources in that when you've got a dysfunctional offense. So I think they also go offensive. I think they go right tackle. I think they go Kelvin Banks, who's got that versatility. Phenomenal guy on the outside. Will be there later in the top 10. Mimbu is an option, but I'm just not as high on him. I think he is athletically superior, sure, but he's not as quick. His contact balance isn't as good. He can get knocked off blocks. He can't hit angles the same way Banks can. And all in all, I think Banks is just better, but that's another offensive line need to me.
As much as of a fan I am of Justin Fields, the player, if we're going biggest need, long-term, quarterback could be the biggest need for the Jets. But given the contract that they handed out to Fields, they're definitely not going quarterback here. And I actually disagree on this one. I think getting another pass catcher is the Jets' biggest need. Because when you have someone like Fields, he's not going to elevate the mediocre to not so great talent the Jets have in their wide receiver or tight end room. I mean, Allen Lazard, Tyler Johnson, Jeremy Ruckert at tight end. Those are their other options outside of Garrett Wilson. Justin Fields, he's not going to do a whole lot to raise their floors. So I think you need to bring in another elite pass catcher via a Tyler Warren. Hopefully he's on the board there for them at 7, because then you have Tyler Warren, who can dominate from the tight end position. You have Garrett Wilson on the outside, and it makes it more likely Justin Fields is able to succeed also with Breece Hall in the backfield.
I don't mind a tight end going here. Warren is physically capable of being a really good run blocker, which the Jets definitely want to run with their current roster construction. Didn't show that in high levels in college, but he can definitely be coached up to that. I just don't think rolling in with another bad offensive line here is really a sustainable strategy. If your team was watching their quarterback get pummeled last year with Aaron Rodgers, and you've got a young guy you have some faith in, you want to give him as much time in the pocket as you can. And adding offensive line build does that and helps the run game. And I'm not going to keep repeating myself. I could say offensive line again for the Miami Dolphins, which is definitely a big need, don't get me wrong. But since Jalen Ramsey is on the way out, I think they are in desperate need of a cornerback. Their secondary was rough outside of Ramsey last year, and it's just going to get worse if he gets the boot. So Will Johnson is who I think is the best fit.
Stop stealing my notes.
Hey, that's a Michigan man. That is my guy I'm talking about. I think if it was just Travis Hunter, the cornerback, I would take Will Johnson over him. Phenomenal in zone coverage. Really fast, has the ability to be an elite man guy. I truly believe the arm length stuff doesn't worry me. The injury history stuff doesn't worry me. The lack of aggression his junior year in the run game stuff really doesn't worry me. His sophomore year, he was the best player in the country. I think he can recapture that in the pros.
I basically have the same exact take as you do. Before the Jalen Ramsey trade rumors were coming out, or the fact that the Dolphins were looking to trade him, you can't go wrong with offensive line for the Dolphins, especially when Tua is your quarterback. You need to keep him upright as much as you possibly can. So offensive line, even with Jalen Ramsey probably out the door, I don't think you can really go wrong there. They had Armstead just retire in the offseason, so I think that is certainly an option, especially if Membu or Will Campbell happen to fall all the way to them. Maybe they take a flyer on someone like Josh Simmons, who's very talented but coming off of that injury. So I think offensive line is on the board, but with Ramsey headed out the door, I think Will Johnson adds a lot of youth and talent to that secondary for them.
Something interesting they could do, Benjamin Morrison may be available by the time they're scheduled to pick in the second round, assuming they held on to their day 2 pick. I've not looked at that extensively. If they got a day 2 pick, they could target Morrison, and then maybe they go Simmons, maybe they go Membu. I think one of those two will be on the board. Simmons looked very good and mobile at his pro day, but again, he's coming off a massive knee injury, so who's to say how he's going to hold up in contact. Buffalo Bills, they need a guy who can win in the pass rush one-on-one. And I was pretty hard set on that being a defensive end, but I'm kind of switching over to best player available as I think more about it. If Walter Nolan falls down there, if Kenneth Grant is available by the time they're picking, I think they'll probably be better than any edge prospect left on the board. But if Mike Green, due to his character concerns, keeps slipping, I think Buffalo takes a flyer on him. James Pierce, strong contender as well. The coaching stuff for the coaching concern issues for him, not great. But again, they need somebody who can get after it in the pass rush. Secondary is a little bit weak too. I think they could bolster that in free agency or in later picks, but they need some consistent one-on-one pass rush wins.
In this video, for me, this is at least going to be a trend with these high-end teams that contended for a Super Bowl last year, will be contending or hopefully in contention for a Super Bowl this year, is that they're going to be looking to draft the best defensive player available left on their board, whoever may fall. I think when you take a look at where the Bills struggled in the postseason or last season, the Ravens ran the ball at will at them up and down the field. The Chiefs ran for, I believe, around 130 yards on them in the conference championship game. So I think they're going to look to add the most talented player possible to their front seven, whether it is Kenneth Grant, who falls to their pick, a Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon out of Oregon, who sounds more likely right now to be on the board. I think it also would be irresponsible to rely solely on Joey Bosa's health to be that high-end productive pass rusher for you on the outside. So I think they either look to add a rotational piece to their pass rush that will improve their sack numbers, or look to add someone on the interior that helps their run defense while also adding depth and hopefully an interior pass rush there.
I mean, with the Bills cap situation, all they really can do is rely on Joey Bosa. Whoever they draft, they're going to need Bosa to stay on the field so that guy isn't getting tight end attention, or that guy isn't getting double teamed every play if he's an interior guy. It's the risk you got to take if you're in a bad cap spot because you pay too many offensive players, but hey, better than not having Josh Allen. Bouncing on over to the AFC West, and with the Las Vegas Raiders, it's pretty easy. They need a running back. They need Ashton Genty. Conceivably, he will not be on the board by the time the Raiders are picking. That's the one fly in the ointment for them. He might go off the board at 4 or 5 if somebody trades up, or the Patriots are just stuck on going best player available, same with the Jags, and say, hey, that's the guy we need. I don't think that's likely, but if that does happen, then you can start the conversation about, okay, is Tedero McMillan worth this pick, or do we trade down? But that needs running back, and if it's not Gingy, I think they do move out here. Obviously, could stand to have a good pass catcher to pair with Brock Bowers, with Jacoby Myers, but they have a bunch of RB3s in their backfield, and Pete Carroll loves hammering that ball out. They need an engine. Maybe even going Amari and Hampton. They're that desperate for it.
Mostert, if you're being generous, is an RB2, but he's not an RB1. We found out last year Zamir White certainly is not a running back you want taking anything close to a significant amount of carries.
North Carolina high school football legend Zamir White, I'll have you know.
And then their wide receiver room also isn't looking great. You got Jacoby Myers, Tucker, Kyle Phillips. So they need some talent on the offensive side of the ball. They do have Brock Bowers at tight end, so you like that there. But I do think Genty just would add a different element to this offense. You take a look at what he did in the playoffs, fighting for those extra yards every single time, turning what for most running backs would be negative 3-yard rushes into plus 4-yard gains. What he did against Oregon last year during the regular season, I think he would drastically help the Raiders offense, and running back would be their biggest need. But like you said, it wouldn't hurt for them to also add a wide receiver.
The issue with Raheem, I think, is he's definitely an outside the tackles runner, and Pete Carroll wants to run up the middle, which is kind of why he gets bumped down to RB3 stats. Obviously, they're going to do some stuff outside, but Ginty is such an in-between the tackles maul. It's just the perfect fit. Denver Broncos. Prior to free agency, the easy pick would say, okay, pass catcher, whether that be Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, Golden, whatever. I kind of think they're good on the receiver side. They fixed the tight end hole with Evan Ingram. He can kind of be that slot guy, which is the role Colston Loveland would fill in the NFL. I don't think they need somebody in line. I don't think Warren's going to be available for him. And I really don't mind their wide receiver situations. I'm going running back here as well, but this is where I think things get interesting, because Hampton may not be on the board depending on how bold teams are being, depending on if you think someone's going to do a Jahmyr Gibbs and overdraft him in the top 10. So I think this pick is traded if the Denver Broncos don't get select Hampton, and if he's still on the board, that's their move.
I agree. We're agreeing on a lot today. Something is wrong.
Let me consult the depth chart real quick. I'll come up with a different take.
Something is wrong, because their running back room, I am the furthest thing from in love with it. When they signed Evan Ingram, I think that signified they're not going to draft a tight end. I think it also probably signified they don't think one of the top tight ends is going to be on the board. I don't think Loveland will be there. I think Tyler Warren 100% is going in the top 10 based off of a few teams. One we'll get to a little bit later. So I think they're looking to go a high-end running back here. Omarion Hampton fits that for me. I think he would add a different dimension to that Broncos offense, give them an elite talent that Bo Nix can hand the ball off to. So
as I look at their depth chart here a little bit more, Alex Singleton is going to be playing a lot of snaps for them at linebacker beside Dre Greenlaw. If there's an area on the weakness, that's probably it. So assuming they want to build on their strength, I think the Jihad Campbell pick is now on the board for the Denver Broncos as well. If you want to go something other than a running back and stop agreeing all the time. And obviously, if one of the really good tackles falls, I would not be shocked in the slightest if Peyton said, okay, we'll get that guy and sit him behind our guys, let him develop a little bit. So this team is pretty well constructed. Running back's in need, but if you don't think they're going to spend a day one pick, they'll go Caleb Johnson in the second or someone like that, Travion Henderson. Then best defensive linebacker available or best offensive lineman available.
It depends on how they feel about the receivers, too. They could draft a receiver here.
Yeah, but receiver's also an option. I don't mind Cortland Sutton. I don't mind Marvin Mims. They still have got Troy Franklin, who already has chemistry with Bo Nix, and they've got Evan Ingram. They've got 3 good pass catchers and someone who can develop. So the Broncos are a good team. The position of weakness is quarterback, but I just don't see them going quarterback first round this year.
Got to just slide in that Bo Nix hate.
Not even hate, man. Not even hate. Anyway, Chargers, it's got to be a wide receiver. It has got to be a wide receiver. I like Quentin Johnston more than anyone else. I probably like him more than his mom at this point. Lad McConkey's great. They don't have an X who can win outside. Tight end, also an option, but it's got to be someone who can catch passes. And if it's a tight end, it's going to be Colston Loveland, who really isn't a true in-line guy. He's more of a slot guy. Yes, we saw the interior of their offensive line get pillaged by the Texans on stunts. They can fix that in the second round. They've already fixed that somewhat in free agency. They have got to get Herbert someone he can throw the ball to consistently and win one-on-ones, get separation, which just isn't on this team right now. I'll say Matthew Golden gets picked if Colston Loveland isn't available, but if Loveland's on the board and the Chargers selecting, it's a Jim Harbaugh guy. He's going to LA.
Yeah, it kind of depends on how the draft breaks, because sometimes when we see certain positions go, there's a run on them. So if Tyler Warren goes off at 5 or 7 and goes in the top 10, then someone's panicking, drafting Colston Loveland early. If receivers start to go, then maybe you see it go McMillan, Egbuka, Golden, somewhere in that order. It seems like teams value them differently. They value their skill sets a little bit differently. So I think ideally, Harbaugh getting his guy in Colston Loveland would be where they want to go. Getting a speedy receiver like Golden would be excellent. But I could also see them looking to add to that defensive line. We know Harbaugh loves building in the trenches. And if someone like Kenneth Grant is still on the board for them, someone he coached in college, I feel like he would jump on the opportunity to beef up the Chargers defensive line and improve their defense.
Jim Harbaugh's approach is he's going to draft an offensive or defensive lineman in the first 3 rounds of every single draft he's involved in. So any pick in the trenches feels safe. I just think that can be addressed later in the draft. The guards and the defensive tackles are a less premier position than they used to be. Finally, the Kansas City Chiefs division winners. We all watch the Super Bowl. We know what the issue is. We know they are kind of stuck where they're at tackle. They're either going to have to rely on a rookie who was terrible in 2024 to develop greatly if they want Mahomes' blindside to be safe, or they're just going to roll into next year with another rookie at that position and hope he can figure it out. If Banks is available, he'll be the pick. He is the most day one polished tackle in the class. I don't think he's on the board. I don't think Josh Simmons is on the board. I think Connerly out of Oregon might not even be on the board. They're going to have to reach drastically. So I think they go for Cameron Williams, the other tackle from that Texas team. Tremendous athletic upside, very polished technique, but has a bad habit of reaching and is not that fast. Powerful, but not fast. It's going to be a tackle, though, and I think they're just throwing shots up in the dark. Their recent approach to drafting O-linemen has not been successful outside of the interior.
Yeah, the Chiefs' biggest need is offensive line, and I'm a little tired of the Chiefs fan base that is propagating the narrative the Chiefs don't need to draft offensive line, because if you look at their history, they're not that great at developing it, or because of the idea that they signed the 49ers backup tackle to a small amount of money. That means he's going to jump right in and be a high-level starter for him. I don't think either of those are reliable options. They haven't drafted an offensive tackle in the first round since Eric Fisher, so that's not something they do regularly. The Chiefs haven't had the opportunity to draft these high-graded offensive tackles in the first round because of how good they've been, and they've honestly missed when they've drafted offensive linemen later in the draft. So I think investing in one early, where if he doesn't start right away, he can develop behind the offensive linemen that you have. And we've seen in years past, whether it is the Buccaneers Super Bowl or the Super Bowl this past season, the offensive line gets a little banged up and then Patrick Mahomes has no one in front of him. So the idea of building depth, the idea of getting younger and a rookie contract on the books for a player that has a lot of potential, I think is a great idea. So I think the Chiefs adding offensive line would be the biggest need and most helpful for them next season in the long-term future.
Yeah, speaking a little bit more about Jalen Moore, I am also skeptical if he could hold up for an entire season at left tackle. I think he could be the guard replacement. I think you could bump him inside to replace Tooney and have him be more successful given his physical tools. Have to wait and see, but either way, unless you're going to be comfortable rolling Mike Caliendo out the entire year, something needs to change.
Unless you really believe Nick Wright, if the backup to the GOAT, apparently is going to be a great offensive tackle in the NFL.
I'm sorry, the backup to the GOAT.
Trent Williams.
Okay. I don't know if Trent Williams is the GOAT. He's definitely up there, but I digress. Nicholas has his peculiar takes. Cleveland Browns, they need a quarterback. They're not going to take one. Their biggest need right now is quarterback. I don't care them having the second overall pick. I don't care what it's being mocked at. They need a quarterback. They should take one, or they should trade down and get some draft capital back, or try and select one day 2. You can say, well, they're obviously selecting Travis Kelce or Abdul Carter, yada, yada, yada. They're rolling Kenny Pickett out as their guy week 1. They need a quarterback.
Or Joe Flacco.
They need one. If the point of this video is about each team's biggest need, yeah, that's it. It's not going to be the most likely pick. It's not going to be the best pick, but they should draft Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, their biggest need is quarterback. You don't really have a reliable option there. You have Joe Flacco, who might provide a game of brilliance, but then the next week he'll throw 4 interceptions and have 100 yards passing.
I think the Joe Flacco, that playoff run, doesn't exist anymore because we saw him on the Colts in objectively a much better system, behind a better offensive line and with better receivers, look just absolutely terrible multiple points throughout the year. Only looked good against the worst secondary in football, the Jaguars.
I mean, just something about the magic that exists in Cleveland.
I don't know. The magic that exists in Cleveland.
Care
to elaborate on that?
To add on, well, Deshaun Watson certainly
Joe Flacco's fin it out. Is that what we're getting?
But to speak to the Browns, they're really bad pretty much everywhere outside of maybe their offensive guards, Jerry Jeudy and Njoku on the offensive side of the ball. Nick Chubb, injured, also not currently on the team right now. I do not like their running back situation. You threw out a couple weeks ago, maybe they throw their hat in the Gentry ring, add him to the offense. Don't know how likely that is, but quarterback's bad. Wide receiver outside of Judy's bad. So quarterback's their biggest need. I think they probably likely go Travis Hunter to help the receiver room and add an element to their defense. But the Browns, much like my Giants, they're, in
a perfect world, the Browns would have the 2nd overall pick in last year's draft. They would not have made the playoffs, and they could select Jaden Daniels and then ruin his career. But the Cleveland's a mess. Bengals. The question is not what side of the ball is going to be drafted. The question is what position. Clearly, it is going to be a defensive player. That is their biggest need. And I kind of think that piece needs to fall at somewhere on the defensive line. I know they just got burned with Chris Jenkins, but I wouldn't mind a Kenneth Grant pick. I know their current pass rush situation relies entirely on one man right now. I would not mind giving him some support with someone like a Mike Green on the outside. It's got to be somewhere on defense. The biggest need, half of the football team.
Unless...
If I had to nail down one player, I think Mykel Williams is probably the best bet. The rotation stuff, the low production doesn't really bother me. The physical traits are fantastic. He can beat NFL tackles. He can play a little bit off ball if he needs to. He's their guy.
The Bengals need to use every single draft pick they have in the 2025 draft to draft a defensive player. The only out I'll give for them is if they throw a draft pick at an offensive guard to help protect Joe Burrow. Because when you look where they've spent all their money, it's been all on the offensive side of the ball. They've given all to T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. All the money's there. When you do that, you have to add young, cheap talent to the defensive side of the ball, which you're able to do through the draft. So the reason the Bengals weren't a playoff team last year was because their defense was horrible. They now have given all the money to the offensive side of the ball, and they need to add talent. Whether it's Jahad Campbell falling, Jalen Walker, you mentioned Mykel Williams, Kenneth Grant, Mike Green, Jahdae Barron. I don't care what the position is. Just add a talented defensive player, the best player available at every single one of your draft picks, and then your defense has a hope of being competitive next year.
I'll back off the Mykel Williams thing a little bit. I mentioned conceivably could play off ball. Jalen Walker can possibly play 2 defensive positions at a really high level. It is worth the Bengals trading up in some way to get Walker, just so you can get something, just so you can get some points on the board on that side of the ball. Walker's the guy they need to draft. Pittsburgh Steelers. Dan Moore is out of that building, which means their O-line is now an area of weakness. Kelvin Banks is a mature guy. I think he'd be a good fit here alongside Tomlin, an organization which is in a little bit of turmoil. But right now, Aaron Rodgers is not on the roster. Their guy is Mason Rudolph. Well, Rudolph, I think, is 5-1, 6-2, something like that with the Steelers as their starter. I don't think he's their long-term answer. The Steelers are another team that needs to draft a quarterback. And I know I picked Shedeur to go second to the Browns, or I said he should go second to the Browns. Shedeur should also go to the Steelers if he is still on the board for them. If he's not, then you can ask yourself, okay, do we take a lineman and then trade back? Do we take a member of the defense and keep building on that side of the ball, get a pass rusher beside T.J. Watt? That's a more open-ended question, but the need is clearly quarterback. You cannot have Mason Rudolph be your week 1 guy.
I would also tend to agree. I think with Aaron Rodgers not being on the team, it sounds like he's not going to sign with the team before the NFL draft. Maybe he'll hold out until someone gets injured, and then they're willing to bring him in as a veteran to help the team potentially contend for the playoffs. So I think quarterback certainly is their biggest need. Will Shedeur be there? Do they throw a dart at Jackson Dart and bring him onto the team? Potentially. I also think running back is a need. If Hampton happens to get into the 20s where the Steelers are picking, adding a strong, powerful running back to complement complement Jalen Warren's skill set, I think that's something the Steelers could look at doing.
I think they would rather just wait and draft a Quinshon Judkins in the second round, a guy like that. Maybe a Caleb Johnson if they get really lucky and he falls. Someone of that ilk instead of using the first-round pick on Hampton when there are other good players and big needs available. So yeah, since we've been agreeing too much, I'm going to let you do the Ravens, and I'll let you do the AFC staff. And while you zig, I'm going to zag here. So we're no longer going to agree. I'm quicker on my feet than you. So you'll do the Ravens, and you can do the AFC South.
Well, I don't want you to lie.
I'm not lying. I'll think of different answers. None of these teams have one set need, except for the Texans, and we'll agree on the Texans. But
the Ravens, I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about the Bills. Like many of these other hyper-talented teams in the AFC, they are in a position where they can kind of draft the best player available. So with Kyle Van Noy being one of their better pass rushers and extremely old, maybe they go a Jalen Walker, a Michael Williams, Mike Green if he falls all the way down due to character concerns. They have the opportunity to go Malachi Starks to pair next to Kyle Hamilton. They can kind of take whoever they want, but when it comes to a sneaky, maybe bigger need than some people would acknowledge, maybe they look to draft the best offensive guard and interior lineman available, because they did lose that a little bit in the offseason, just to ensure the run game remains as dominant and Lamar Jackson remains protected.
Much like the Buffalo Bills, this Ravens team needs someone who can win one-on-one pass rush reps. Mitabike is a good player on the interior, but he needs to be schemed into some of his sacks. No one on that Ravens team can consistently beat tackles. Donovan Ezeraku is twitchy enough, has enough bend, can get low enough on the outside where I think he could be a pass rush specialist. Not going to be that good in the run game because he's very undersized. But again, I've mentioned it before, the entire class is undersized at the defensive end position, it feels like, outside of Landon Jackson. And I like Landon Jackson. I'm not going to mock him going in the first round. Get a pass rush specialist in Ezeraku late. He should still be on the board. If he gets pulled, I then think you look at a Nick Scolatron and say, okay, we're not going to get our guy day one, but Lamar's going to be good for another 5-6 years bare minimum. We'll get a developmental guy who could also be a lead on the edge. But it needs to be an edge rusher who has some chance to be really effective one. I don't care about the run defense. I care about the pass rush.
So we're agreeing.
You did not mention Donovan Ezeraku, and I did not mention guards. They're fine at guard.
Well, moving on to our last division. At the bottom, the team I said was going to be the worst team in the NFL. They wound up being exactly that. I don't know if there's much of a point talking about their biggest needs because we basically know who's going to be first overall. It's Cam Ward. He's out live streaming Fortnite saying that Calvin Ridley's better than A.J. Brown. He's saying the best running backs in the NFL are the Titans running backs. So it's going to be Cam Ward. Some people, I know Isaiah feels a little bit this way. You know, maybe they should have given...
Will Levis is a much higher athletic ceiling than Cam Ward. I don't think there's much point in arguing that. People will say, no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Just don't know ball in the slightest. Say whatever you want about what's going on in between his ears, but physically Levis is better, and he's in the first year of a somewhat complicated offense. Bad teams should draft the best player available. This team's defensive line is a mess on the edge. Obviously, they figured out the tackles with Sweat and Simmons on the inside. I don't think they need to go Mason Graham. I think they could stand to go either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter because their secondary also weak. Their pass rush on the outside bad, and it's going to get worse because they lost Harold Landry to the Patriots. One of those two guys should be this pick. They need to fix their defense in some way. If you think the offensive line is an issue, which it really was last year, and you think Dan Moore isn't enough to really solve that, then you can start getting into the Will Campbell talks. But clearly there are better prospects than Ward. There are bigger needs on this team than quarterback. And worst case scenario, Will Levis stinks again. You get a top 5 pick in 2026. And you can draft a much more talented QB.
Well, when you're picking first overall, there are a lot of positions and areas you can improve.
Certainly a few.
Especially when
Don't
you
tell
lose.
Giants fans that who also watch your team win 3 games because they think their team is perfect outside of quarterback.
Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who I'm glad a lot of people have started to agree with my take on who they should draft. I think that player should be Tyler Warren. I think when you bring in an offensive coach as your new head coach, Trevor Lawrence coming off a year where he got injured, you have Brian Thomas on the outside as an elite number 1 receiver. I think if you bring someone like Tyler Warren in, who has a lot of different things he can do at a high level. He can run the ball. He can play in the wildcat once you get into the red zone. He catches the ball at a high level. He can develop at a blocker with his size at 6'6", 260. I think adding that quality of pass catcher to the Jaguars offense is going to be something they're not going to be able to resist, and it's something I think they should do.
I know it's going to be an offensive player. I know it's a popular pick, whether that be wide receiver, tight end, offensive lineman, whatever. This team had Trayvon Walker and Joshua Hines Allen in 2024. They were arguably the worst passing defense in football. Think about what that says about the state of your secondary when you have two premier tier 2 or tier 1 edge players and still are just getting lit up through the air. This team needs cornerback help. It needs safety help. It needs a lot of work done on the back end. I don't think they're going to draft John A. Barron or Will Johnson. They should. If I had to pick one, just because they need someone without any health concerns, I'd go Barron here. I think Johnson is better, but they need someone who can be there day one, who can defend multiple positions, can be that nickel guy, can be that outside guy, but they should draft a cornerback. I don't care what the consensus is. I don't care who's mocking it. This secondary is the worst in football.
Well, the consensus, for the most part, all offseason has been Mason Graham as far as the chalk pick goes.
That'd be nice. I think he's the best player available, but biggest need is the secondary. And that's what this video is titled, right? That we're titling it that?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. That is the biggest need.
Headed to the Colts. Now, the big chalk pick for them all offseason
Tyler Warren
was Tyler Warren. But
Colston Loveland.
There's no way I think Tyler Warren's going to be there. Is tight end a need for them? Yes, of course. Whether it is Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones there, you maybe like a security blanket. So I think Colston Loveland is a player that will be high on their board there. Edge, adding another pass rusher to that defense to help them on that side of the ball is a possibility. They're picking at 14, so they're going to have a wider variety of options and directions they can go. But I do think as long as Colston Loveland is there, I think they err on that side because I think they're desperate to figure out if Anthony Richardson can be their guy.
They have Alex Pierce, Michael Pittman, and Adonai Mitchell. The need is not for another pass catcher. The Minnesota Vikings raided this team's interior offensive line in free agency. Fry's gone. Kelly gone. Tackle situation I don't think is too bad. They got Nelson, but they need a new guard and they need a new center. At 14, I think you now are getting into the territory where you're not going to get judged too heavily for taking an interior offensive lineman, particularly if that guy works out. Jared Wilson and Tyler Booker would be my picks for these positions. Wilson is a hyper-athletic guy who I don't think is a good scheme fit, so maybe I think they don't go that direction. He's much more of a Miami Dolphin. Tyler Booker, big physical mauler, pounded up the middle with Jonathan Allen. They need a guard replacement. They need O-line help. That also helps Anthony Richardson, particularly if he's going to be a run-first quarterback. So I say Tyler Booker is their biggest need, guard is their biggest need, and they fill it right there.
Still not the biggest Gray Zabel fan, are you?
I think Gray Zabel is much more of a project because he played tackle predominantly in college, played a lot of things in college. I think he'd be an interesting center prospect, in truth. But clearly he's not going to be a tackle, and I'd much rather have Booker than him.
Tyler Booker is someone that's been falling
I
on
don't
people's
care
draft
about
boards.
a guard's RAS score. I really don't.
I'm just saying, I think it would surprise a lot of people
if your offense is going to rely on Tyler Booker to pull out and block safeties, yeah, you probably shouldn't pick him. But Jonathan Taylor is an in-between the tackles runner. Tyler Booker can win in man run blocking and pass blocking reps.
Texans, winner of the AFC South. I was trying to think of a pun there, but I did
gold
not have
medalist in the Special Olympics, some might say.
Offensive line, Buka would be my pick for the Texans here.
Ain't no Buka involved. It's offensive line. I said Larry Tunsil is a little bit overrated. I've said it's the right move to move off of him. That was done with the thought process that, okay, we are spending substantial draft capital on filling those holes. We'd go after free agents who can fill those holes. In free agency, they got bumps from the Minnesota Vikings to replace some of their interior guys. If it's an upgrade, it's a very minor upgrade. They need guys who can win on the outside in pass blocking reps. They need guys who can beat NFL defensive ends, can lock things down, and they need guys who they can run out with Joe Mixon to keep him healthy and on the field to make CJ Stroud's life as much easier as possible. I don't care if Burden falls. I don't care if Travis Hunter falls. They need to pick an offensive lineman. The ideal pick is keeping things in Texas, getting Banks. Mimbu's probably not going to be there because someone is going to be enthralled by the athleticism. I wouldn't hate Booker here at all. That wouldn't bother me in the slightest because the guy I think he's a big mauling blocker who can hold up in pass pro. But they need something on the O-line.
I agree with you. We feel the same way about their offensive line. The only reason Egbuka would intrigue me there is because Stephon Diggs got hurt early last season, left to another team. You have Tank down the roster, who's wildly productive when he's healthy. Keyword or keywords, when he is healthy, he gets injured a lot. And then you really just have Nico Collins.
Got Christian Kirk now.
They have Christian
Nico
Kirk.
Collins and Christian Kirk is not bad, man.
Well, with Christian Kirk,
Dalton Schultz?
he is a little bit older, struggles with injuries. So I think if they're looking at Egbuka on the board and him and CJ Stroud have that history of playing at a high level together, I think that's an intriguing option pairing them up. But if it were, like the video is titled, Biggest Need, it probably is more offensive line and just adding as much talent as you possibly can to fix what was a disappointing, to say the least, performance last year.
Yeah, look, I disagree with you on the wide receiver thing. It's leaving aside the potential fit with Egbuka. Nico Collins, very good receiver. Christian Kirk, you can say he's a little bit old, still productive when he's on the field, kind of like Tank Dell. And Dalton Schultz is a very good tight end. You can address that day too. You can find somebody in the second round who, rather than just being a superstar X, and let's be honest, there is not a true superstar X in this class outside of maybe Hunter, who may be a full-time defensive player. You can find a guy who fills the hole, a guy who can line up in the slot, a guy who's a deep threat. Whatever you think your team needs in the passing game, you can get a specific guy to fill that hole. I don't think it's worth using the first-round pick on it. If they draft Egbuka, that is a CJ Stroud pick, and they will regret it.
That has been our biggest need for every team in the AFC. Check out our video going over the biggest need for every team in the NFC. Next week, we will have our final mock draft where we go back and forth on what we think is going to happen. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned to that. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and we'll see you in the next one.